The funeral of General Thomas Caldwell is a national event, the kind that draws the attention of the entire country. Thousands gather at Arlington Cemetery under a sky heavy with grey clouds. The crisp uniforms of the soldiers in attendance form perfect lines as they stand at attention, their faces solemn and unreadable. The flag-draped casket rests at the center of the ceremony, a symbol of a lifetime of service and sacrifice. A sea of mourners dressed in black fills the rows of chairs. Family members sit at the front, their expressions etched with grief, while high-ranking officials, both military and political, take their seats. Nearby, the air is thick with sorrow, but also respect as the nation bids farewell to one of its finest leaders. Cameras flash as journalists capture every moment of the event. Newscasters whisper into their microphones, giving live updates to audiences across the country. The sound of muffled crying is heard from the general's widow, who clutches a folded flag in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly though she tries to keep her composure. Behind her stand two of her children, both in military uniform, following in their father's footsteps. Their expressions are stoic, but their eyes betray the pain they feel as they watch their father's casket lay in wait for the final rites. A low murmur spreads through the crowd as General Marcus Hayes steps forward, his towering figure commanding immediate attention. He is one of the most respected military figures in the country, a man whose leadership and courage have earned him countless honors, yet he carries himself with humility, his presence radiating the strength and discipline expected of a man of his rank. He takes his place at the podium and clears his throat, his deep voice steady despite the emotions of the moment. We are gathered here today to honor a man who dedicated his life to his country. He begins. His words are powerful and heartfelt, capturing the legacy of the fallen general. The soldiers stand a little taller as he speaks, their gazes locked on him, their respect unwavering. But not everyone in attendance shares that same reverence. Standing at the edge of the crowd, dressed in his police uniform, Officer Craig Donovan shifts on his feet, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched as he listens to General Hayes speak. There is something simmering beneath the surface of his cold stare, something ugly and festering, a deep-seated resentment that he has carried for years. His fingers tap against the side of his belt, his hand resting just inches away from his holstered weapon. His heart pounds harder with each passing second, a mixture of anger and frustration boiling inside him. He has always hated men like Marcus Hayes, men who climbed the ranks, men who received medals, men who stood in front of crowds being celebrated for their heroism, while he, a man who had worn his badge for years, felt overlooked, unappreciated. His grip tightens around the strap of his belt, his breathing shallow and uneven. The sight of Hayes commanding the attention of the entire nation makes his blood run hot. He tells himself it's not fair, he tells himself it should have been different. And in that moment, as the general continues his speech, Craig Donovan makes a decision, one that will change the course of his life forever. His fingers twitch against the cool metal of his holster, the weight of his gun pressing against his side. He glances around at the security officers stationed throughout the ceremony, their eyes focused elsewhere, their attention on the perimeter, ensuring no outside threats disturb the funeral. He knows they are expecting danger to come from the outside, but what they don't know is that the real threat is already standing among them, disguised as one of their own. He takes a slow breath, his fingers gripping the handle of his weapon, tightening around it, the hatred in his chest pulsing like a heartbeat, louder than the sound of the general's voice, louder than the quiet sobs of the grieving widow, louder than anything else in the world. The moment is upon him, his body tenses, his pulse racing as he moves his hand, positioning it to unholster his gun. But before he can take the final step, before he can fully pull the weapon free, he hears a sudden sharp intake of breath from someone nearby, and that's when he realizes someone is watching him, someone has seen what he is about to do. Craig Donovan's breath hitches for a split second as he realizes someone has noticed the movement of his hand. The weight of the gun in its holster suddenly feels heavier, the cold metal pressing against his fingertips. His pulse pounds in his ears, drowning out the general's voice, drowning out the quiet sobs of the mourners. He shifts his eyes slightly without turning his head, scanning the crowd, searching for the person who saw him. He spots a young soldier standing a few feet away, his eyes locked onto Donovan's hand, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. His lips part as if he is about to say something, but hesitation flickers across his face. He doesn't want to cause a scene, not at a funeral, but his body stiffens the way a soldier does when he senses imminent danger. Donovan's mind races. The funeral is too high profile, too many cameras, too many witnesses. If he pulls his gun now, he won't even get the chance to aim before a dozen other weapons are pointed at him. But the thought of standing there listening to Marcus Hayes speak any longer makes his stomach churn. He clenches his jaw, his fingers twitching in frustration. He shouldn't have come here, but at the same time, he needed to see it, needed to witness firsthand the way everyone fawned over Hayes, as if he was some kind of hero. Donovan had spent his entire career believing men like Hayes were the enemy, taking the positions that belonged to real Americans, climbing the ranks on nothing but politics and favoritism, and now here he was commanding an entire nation's attention, while Donovan himself remained just another nameless officer in the background. The young soldier is still watching him, eyes narrowing slightly, suspicion growing. Donovan knows that if he hesitates any longer, if he keeps his hand hovering near his holster, the soldier will act. Maybe he will reach for his own weapon, maybe he will call out and alert the others. The window of opportunity is closing fast. So Donovan does the only thing he can do to avoid raising suspicion. He exhales slowly and lets his hand drop back to his side, feigning casual indifference. The soldier's gaze lingers for a moment longer before he finally looks away, turning his attention back to the general's speech. But Donovan knows the damage is already done. He has been seen, he has drawn attention to himself, even if only briefly, and that means he has to be more careful. He shifts his stance, blending into the crowd once more, though his frustration simmers just beneath the surface. He watches as General Hayes continues speaking, his voice steady, his expression composed. He talks about honor, about sacrifice, about what it means to serve something greater than oneself, and the crowd hangs on to every word, drinking it in as if it were gospel. Donovan grits his teeth, barely resisting the urge to scoff. This is what makes him sick, watching people like Hayes be worshipped as if they were untouchable, when in reality they were just men, no different from anyone else, and yet somehow they were always the ones given the highest praise, the highest respect. And what had Donovan ever gotten for his years of service? Nothing, no medals, no ceremonies, no promotions, just the same mundane uniform, the same thankless job, the same invisible existence. His fingers twitch again, craving the feeling of his gun in his grip. But he knows he can't make a move, not yet, not with so many eyes on him. So instead, he breathes through his nose and forces himself to wait, waiting, calculating. Hayes won't be at that podium forever. At some point, he will step down, he will walk among the mourners, maybe even shake hands with those in attendance, and that's when Donovan will have his chance. That's when he can get close enough to do what he came here to do. But for now, he remains still, his face blank, his rage carefully hidden beneath a mask of indifference as the funeral continues, and the world remains blissfully unaware of a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The weight of the gun presses against Craig Donovan's side, a constant reminder of what he came here to do. The speeches continue, but he hears none of it. His focus is on one thing: General Marcus Hayes, standing tall at the podium, his voice strong and unwavering as he speaks about honor and sacrifice. The crowd listens in reverent silence, hanging on to every word, and the more Donovan watches, the more his anger boils inside him. He should be the one standing there. He should be the one being honored, not some over-decorated politician in a uniform. He shifts his stance, scanning the security detail. They are positioned strategically around the perimeter, some near the stage, others walking the rows of mourners. But they aren't looking for threats within the crowd. Their eyes are on the distance, watching for external dangers. A sniper in the trees, an attacker pushing through the gates. They don't see the real danger standing right among them, dressed in a police uniform, his badge gleaming under the pale grey sky. His fingers twitch once more, but he forces himself to wait. Timing is everything. One wrong move, and he won't even get the chance to raise his weapon. He needs to be smart, careful, deliberate. A slow breath in, a slow breath out. His heart pounced steady, controlled, his pulse no longer erratic with hesitation, no more doubts. This is what he came here to do. and he will see it through. Hayes steps back from the podium, nodding respectfully to the grieving family. As he prepares to take his seat, it is almost time. Donovan flexes his fingers, loosening them, shaking out any stiffness. He doesn't want to fumble at the crucial moment. He doesn't want to miss. He waits as Hayes steps down. The security detail remains relaxed, unaware of the danger lurking within their ranks. The young soldier who had noticed Donovan earlier is focused on something else. Now his moment is coming closer. Then it happens. General Hayes moves through the crowd, shaking hands, offering condolences, nodding to old comrades as he makes his way to his seat, every movement precise, every action deliberate. And that's when Donovan sees his chance. No more waiting, no more hesitation, no more doubts. His hand moves, instinctively gripping the cold metal of his gun, pulling it free from its holster in one smooth motion. For the briefest of moments, time seems to slow. The gun is in his hand, the weight of it familiar, the power of it absolute. He raises his arm, extending the barrel straight ahead, aiming directly at the general's head, his finger tightening over the trigger. The reaction is instant. Chaos erupts before the shot can be fired. Someone yells, gun voices rise in panic, chairs scrape against the ground, people shove and push, desperate to get out of the way. But the soldiers move faster than anyone. Within seconds, multiple weapons are drawn, aimed, locked onto Donovan. A blur of uniforms rushes toward him, but it is already too late. He knows it. He sees it in the eyes of the nearest soldier, the split second before they collide, before a body slams into his side, knocking him off balance. His gun jerks upward. No shot rings out, no bullet is fired, because another soldier is already on him, grabbing his wrist, twisting his arm, forcing his weapon down. Then the impact, bodies crash against him, sending him to the ground. A knee slams into his back, his face is pressed into the grass, his gun ripped from his grip hands, pin his arms to his sides, boots press against his legs, keeping him from moving. Someone is shouting orders, another voice yells for backup, sirens wave in the distance. But the battle is already over. He never got the chance, never even pulled the trigger, never got to prove his point. The weight of bodies on top of him keeps him from struggling, but his rage is still there, burning inside his chest, just as strong as before, maybe even stronger. Above him, General Hayes stands unmoving, his gaze locked onto Donovan, his expression unreadable. The man who was meant to be dead is still alive, standing, breathing, unshaken. The world moves around him, but for a moment it feels as though everything else has faded away. Just him and Donovan staring at one another, one man held down in the dirt, another standing tall above him. And then the silence is shattered as law enforcement rushes in, surrounding them, taking control of the situation, dragging Donovan up to his knees, slapping cuffs around his wrists, pinning his arms behind his back, forcing his head down as he is yanked to his feet. The moment is over, but its impact will ripple through the nation forever. Craig Donovan feels the cold metal of the handcuffs bite into his wrists as officers drag him to his feet. His vision blurs for a moment from the impact of being slammed to the ground, but his mind is clear, burning with rage. His uniform is covered in dirt, his lip is bleeding from the takedown, but none of it matters to him. What matters is that he failed. The general is still alive, standing just feet away, calm and unshaken, as if none of this phases him. Donovan's chest rises and falls with heavy breaths, his muscles tense against the officers holding him, but there is no escape now. The weight of what just happened is crushing, suffocating. The crowd is still in shock. Some people are frozen in place, staring at him as if he were a monster. Others are backing away, whispering frantically to one another. Some are crying. The funeral that had begun with honor and mourning is now tainted with fear and chaos. Officers from multiple agencies rush toward the scene, their weapons drawn, but the threat is already neutralized. Donovan is surrounded, pinned under the watchful eyes of military, police, federal agents, and local law enforcement. There is nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. A firm hand grips his arm, tightening around his bicep as an officer speaks into his earpiece, confirming the suspect is in custody. Radio chatter crackles around him, a flurry of voices reporting updates, requesting additional units, making sure every angle is covered, as if he is some kind of terrorist. But the worst part, the part that makes his blood boil more than anything else, is the silence from Marcus Hayes. The general stands there, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Not a single word leaves his mouth, not a single reaction beyond those sharp eyes locked onto Donovan. Donovan clenches his jaw, his mind races, searching for a way to justify what he did, a way to twist this into something else. But there is no way out, and deep down, he knows it. What he did was seen by hundreds, maybe thousands, including reporters, with cameras capturing every second of it. He can already imagine the headlines: racist cop attempts to assassinate military general at funeral. Every network will be playing the footage on repeat. Every politician will be making statements about justice, about racism, about corruption in law enforcement. His name will be spoken with disgust and hatred. The officers holding him begin moving, driving him toward a waiting patrol car. The flashing red and blue lights reflect in the shocked eyes of the onlookers. Some of them pull out their phones, recording as he is shoved forward, forced to march past the very people who had come to honor a fallen hero. He hears snippets of their words, their disbelief, their anger. This is disgusting. At a funeral of all places, he's a cop. How could he do this? A woman steps forward, one of the mourners, her face streaked with tears, her hands clenched into fists. She doesn't say anything, just stares at him with a look of pure hatred, as if he is something less than human. Before Donovan can react, she spits at him. The warm saliva lands on his cheek, but he can't even lift his hands to wipe it away. The officers don't stop moving him. They don't react to the woman's anger, because they understand it. They know what he did, what he almost did, and there is no defending it. As he is pushed closer to the patrol car, a reporter shoves a microphone toward him, asking the question everyone wants to know: why did you do it? What were you thinking? But Donovan stays silent, his mind is spinning. But he has no answer, no excuse. He glares at the reporter, his nostrils flaring. But before he can even think of a response, he is shoved into the back of the car, the door slamming shut behind him. He stares through the window, his breath fogging up the glass, watching as the funeral resumes. Soldiers standing in formation, the general still standing strong, unshaken, victorious. The patrol car begins moving, the sound of sirens filling the air, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd, drowning out the sounds of his own breathing as reality crashes down on him harder than ever before. He failed, and now the whole world knows it. Craig Donovan sits in the back of the patrol car, his wrists aching from the tight cuffs, his breathing shallow, his mind racing, the weight of failure crushing him. The funeral is already fading in the distance, but the reality of what just happened lingers thick in the air. He watches through the smeared glass as cameras flash, reporters scramble to get every detail. Soldiers stand rigid, their expressions hard as stone, and in the middle of it all, General Marcus Hayes remains calm, unshaken, untouched by the chaos. Donovan grits his teeth. The humiliation burns hotter than the anger in his chest. The officer driving doesn't say a word, neither does the one sitting beside him in the passenger seat. But Donovan can feel their disgust. They don't even have to look at him. He knows what they are thinking: another dirty cop, another disgrace to the badge, another story for the world to tear apart. And he knows that's exactly what's going to happen soon. Every news outlet, every social media platform will be flooded with his face, his name, his crime. Headlines will call him a racist, call him a domestic terrorist, call him a disgrace to law enforcement. His jaw clenches, his hands ball into fists. Even though the cuffs dig into his skin, he can already see how this will play out. They will strip him of his badge, of his uniform, of everything he worked for. They will throw him in prison. Let the world watch as another so-called corrupt cop gets what he deserves. And worst of all, they will celebrate General Marcus Hayes even more, make him look like an unshakable hero, as if he weren't already treated like some kind of saint. Donovan's stomach twists at the thought. He had planned everything so carefully, yet he hadn't even managed to fire a single shot. His career is over, his life, as he knows it, is over, and all for nothing. The patrol car pulls up to the station, the heavy steel gates sliding open as they enter the secure parking lot. Within seconds, officers are waiting, ready to pull him out of the car. There are more cameras pointed at him, news vans lined up outside, as if they knew he was coming. They probably did by now. The entire country knows what he did. Every second of his attempted attack was recorded, broadcasted, analyzed, debated. Before he even gets out of the car, people already hate him. The back door swings open, strong hands grip his arms, yanking him out onto the pavement. The officers move quickly, efficiently leading him through the booking process as if he were any other criminal. And now he is no longer a cop, no longer one of them. He is just another suspect, another man in cuffs being processed, fingerprinted, photographed. For his mugshot, the camera flash stings his eyes, and for the first time it truly hits him. There is no coming back from this. This isn't just a suspension or a hearing or a review board. This is it. He is done, finished, ruined. They lead him to a holding cell, pushing him inside the cold metal bars, slamming shut behind him. The small room smells of sweat and regret, the walls covered in faint scratches, carvings of names, words left behind by other men who had sat here before him. His uniform feels wrong now. It doesn't belong to him anymore. He can almost hear the press conference happening somewhere out there, the police chief standing at a podium, shaking his head in disappointment, saying words like, "We do not condone this. We are appalled by this betrayal of duty. We will ensure justice is served." Donovan sits on the metal bench, staring at the wall, his mind blank for the first time since this all began. No more plans, no more anger, just silence, a deep, heavy silence that settles into his bones. The voices outside the bars continue, officers murmuring his name, talking about him, as if he isn't right there sitting in front of them, a disgrace, a failure, a cautionary tale. Before long, the sound of footsteps approaches, the door unlocks, and two officers step inside, one holding a clipboard, the other watching him carefully. "Craig Donovan," they say formally, "the charges against you are as follows." And as they begin reading his crimes out loud, his future is sealed forever. Craig Donovan sits motionless on the cold metal bench, his back pressed against the unforgiving concrete wall. As the officer reads out the charges against him: attempted murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm with intent to commit a felony, endangering the public, and then the worst one, domestic terrorism. The words hit him like a hammer, driving the reality of his situation deeper into his skull. His career is gone, his freedom slipping away with every syllable spoken. The officer's voice is steady, almost detached, as if reading a grocery list, but to Donovan every word is a nail sealing the coffin of his life. He stares straight ahead, his face blank, but inside his thoughts are a storm. How did it come to this? How did he let it all unravel like this? He was supposed to be the one in control, the one taking action, not the one sitting in a cell like a common criminal. The weight of the moment presses down on him, suffocating. He wants to protest, wants to say something, to shift the blame, to justify his actions. But there is nothing he can say, no excuse that will change what he did. The whole world saw him pull his gun. The whole world saw him fail. The officer finishes reading the charges and steps back, nodding to his partner, who steps forward with a pen and a clipboard. "Sign here," the officer says, tone flat. Donovan's hands remain clenched into fists. He doesn't move, doesn't even acknowledge the paper in front of him. His silence earns him a sharp glare. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Donovan looks up, meeting the officer's eyes for the first time. He sees nothing there, no sympathy, no understanding, just duty, just another cop following orders, just like he once did. Finally, he exhales slowly and unclenches his fists. His fingers tremble slightly as he takes the pen. His signature is sloppy, uneven. But it doesn't matter anymore. Nothing does. He drops the pen onto the clipboard. Without a word, the officer takes it back, gives him one last unreadable glance, and then they turn and leave, the heavy door slamming shut behind them, the lock clicking into place with finality. Donovan lets his head fall back against the wall, staring at the ceiling, the dim fluorescent light buzzing faintly above him outside the cell. The station is alive with movement, officers talking, radios buzzing, phones ringing, but inside the cell, there is only silence, thick and suffocating. Minutes pass, maybe hours. Time feels different in here, stretched out and empty. He wonders what they're saying about him out there, how quickly the department is working to erase any trace of his name, how his so-called brothers in blue are distancing themselves from him, pretending they never knew him, pretending they never agreed with the things he said, the things he believed. He imagines his face plastered across every news channel, every headline screaming about the racist cop who tried to assassinate a decorated military general, about the disgrace, about the betrayal of the badge, And then there's Marcus Hayes, still alive, still standing tall and untouched, while Donovan rots in a cell. The thought makes his stomach turn. He grits his teeth, closing his eyes, trying to block it all out. But then the sound of approaching footsteps forces him to look up. The door unknocks again, swinging open. An officer steps inside. But this time they aren't alone. Behind them, a man in a dark suit steps forward, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. Federal, the officer gestures toward Donovan, arms crossed against his chest. You've got company. Donovan's brow furrows slightly as the man in the suit steps closer, his voice calm, measured. Great Donovan, I'm Special Agent Carter with the FBI. I think you and I need to have a little chat. For the first time since he was thrown in this cell, a flicker of something new sparks inside Donovan. Confusion, uncertainty. He knows what's coming. This isn't just about his arrest. This is bigger. Federal involvement means something more, something deeper, something he isn't prepared for. And as Carter takes a seat across from him, his sharp eyes studying every detail of Donovan's face, he realizes that his nightmare is far from over. It is only just beginning. Great Donovan watches as Special Agent Carter adjusts his suit jacket before sitting down across from him, his movements slow, precise, calculating. Donovan has spent years reading people, knowing when a suspect is lying, knowing when someone is holding something back. And right now he can see it in Carter's eyes. This isn't just a standard interrogation. This isn't just about his attempt on General Hayes' life. There is more to this, and that realization sends a chill through his already tense body. Carter clasps his hands together, resting them on the metal table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp, focused for a long moment. Neither man speaks, the silence stretching thick and suffocating. Finally, Carter exhales, shifting slightly in his seat. Before he speaks, his voice calm, steady, controlled. Great Donovan, former police officer, decorated, once respected, now sitting in a holding cell, awaiting trial for attempted murder, domestic terrorism, and half a dozen other charges. Quite a fall from grace, wouldn't you say? Donovan doesn't respond. He just stares at Carter, jaw tight, fingers twitching against his knee. Carter smirks, just a little, barely noticeable. But Donovan catches it. I'll get straight to the point. Carter continues, I know men like you. I've seen them before. You think you're a soldier in some invisible war. You justify your actions, tell yourself you're doing the right thing. But here's the truth, Donovan, you're not a hero, you're not some righteous avenger, you're a man who made a mistake, a very public, very costly mistake, and now you're going to spend the rest of your life paying for it unless you start talking. Donovan lets out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly, talking about what he mutters, his voice low, rough. Carter tilts his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. Come on, Donovan, we both know you weren't acting alone. Men like you don't just wake up one day and decide to assassinate a high-ranking military official at a funeral. Men like you have fed ideas, given encouragement, given targets. Now you can sit there and pretend you were the mastermind, but we both know better, so here's your chance. Tell me who you were working with, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see something other than a life sentence. Donovan's stomach twists. He knew this was coming the second he saw Carter's suit, saw the way he carried himself. The feds think this is bigger than just him. They think he's part of something more organized, more dangerous. And the truth is, they aren't entirely wrong. He wasn't alone in his beliefs. He wasn't alone in his anger. But admitting that means betraying people, people who trusted him, people who saw the world the way he did. He clenches his fists, shifting slightly in his seat. I don't know what you're talking about, he says evenly. I acted alone. No one put me up to anything. No one fed me ideas. I made my own choices. Carter studies him for a long moment before sighing, shaking his head, disappointed but not surprised. You know, Donovan, you're not as smart as you think you are. We already have leads. We already have names. We already know about the forums, the meetings, the conversations you had with other officers, other former military men who share your mindset, men who are just as angry as you are. And we also know that some of them are a lot more dangerous than you are. Some of them won't hesitate like you did. Some of them won't fail like you did. So this is your last chance. Talk now or watch as we dismantle everything you were part of, piece by piece. Donovan's jaw tightens, his mind spinning. He knew they would dig, but he didn't think they would find this much this fast. He keeps his expression neutral, But inside, he feels something new, uncertainty for the first time since his arrest. He feels like the walls are closing in. Carter leans forward, lowering his voice. Just slightly, you think this ends with you. You think once you're locked up, that's it, that your people will keep going unnoticed. No, Donovan, they won't, because we're coming for them next. And when we do, they won't be getting a trial, they won't be getting a deal. They'll be getting labeled as terrorists, as traitors, as threats, and they will disappear one by one. So again, I ask you, do you want to spend the rest of your life in a cell, or do you want to be useful? Donovan swallows hard, his pulse pounding. He thought he had already lost everything, but now he realizes there is still more to lose, and the choice before him is one he never expected to face. Craig Donovan stares at Special Agent Carter, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a crushing force. His whole life has already fallen apart, his career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. But now Carter is offering him a way out, a different kind of escape, one that comes with its own consequences. Carter's words linger in the air, thick with unspoken threats and unshakable certainty. The feds already have leads, they already have names. Donovan wonders just how much they really know and how much they are bluffing, but one thing is clear, they aren't going to stop. His mind races through the options, none of them good. If he talks, he betrays people, people who trusted him, people who believed in him. But if he stays silent, the feds will tear everything apart anyway. They will find what they need with or without him, and if they do it without him, he will be just another name on a long list of disgraced cops, thrown into a maximum security prison, forgotten by the very people he once stood with. He looks down at his hands, fingers curling into fists, his knuckles white with tension. Carter leans back in his chair, watching him closely, giving him time to think. But Donovan knows time is a luxury he no longer has. His silence is an answer, but it is not the answer Carter wants, and that is dangerous. The FBI does not make empty threats. He knows that better than anyone. Finally, he exhales long and slow, lifting his gaze to meet Carter's sharp, calculating eyes. You want names? Donovan says, voice low but steady. Carter doesn't react. No satisfaction, no triumph, just patience. You give me something I can use, and I'll make sure you don't rot in a supermax for the rest of your life. Carter replies, simple, direct, cold. Donovan's stomach twists because he knows exactly what Carter is asking for. Not just a name, not just a lead. They want the structure, they want the network, the connections, the people who think like him, who move in the same circles, and they won't stop until they have it all. He shifts slightly in his seat, his throat dry. Even if I did talk, he says slowly, carefully, how do I know you'll hold up your end of the deal? Carter's smirk is small but undeniable. Donovan, you don't have a choice. The deal is simple. Help us, and we help you. Refuse, and we burn everything down without your cooperation. And trust me when I say we will not be gentle about it. The room feels smaller now, the walls closer, the air heavier. Carter's confidence is unshakable because he knows he has all the power and Donovan has nothing, no leverage, no bargaining chip, just the last remnants of his pride and the knowledge that no matter what he chooses, he has already lost everything he thought mattered. He swallows hard, the metallic taste of regret bitter on his tongue. He thinks about the others, the men he worked alongside, the ones who whispered in dark corners about taking action, about fighting back against a world they believed was leaving them behind. He knows some of them will never be found. They are too careful, too disciplined, but others are not. Finally, he exhales, rubbing his temple, as if trying to ease the pounding inside his skull. He looks up at Carter, jaw tightening, hands flexing against his knees. You want names? Donovan mutters, voice barely above a whisper. Carter doesn't move, doesn't blink, doesn't rush him, but the expectation is there, thick in the air, suffocating. Fine, Donovan says, eyes dark, shoulders slumping slightly. But I want protection, I want guarantees. If I give you what you want, I'm not spending the rest of my life behind bars. Carter nods slowly, a small flicker of approval in his expression. We can work with that, he says, standing up, straightening his suit jacket. And just like that, Craig Donovan signs away the last piece of his soul. Craig Donovan sits in silence, staring at the table, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a boulder. He has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Whatever he was, whatever he believed in, is gone now, replaced by something else, something hollow, something empty. Special Agent Carter watches him for a moment, then nods satisfied before stepping back toward the door. He knocks twice, a sharp, quick sound, and the door swings open. Another agent steps inside, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She holds a folder thick with papers, setting it down in front of Donovan as if it weighs nothing. "This is how this works," Carter says, voice even. "You give us information, we verify it, and if it checks out, we talk about what happens next. But make no mistake, Donovan, this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. You're in deep, and the only way out is through cooperation, real cooperation, not half-truths, not misinformation. You try to play us, and we will bury you faster than you can blink, understood?" Donovan swallows hard, his throat dry. He nods slowly, fingers twitching against the cold metal of the table. Carter slides the folder toward him, flipping it open. Inside are pictures, grainy surveillance shots, chat logs, emails, names he recognizes, some faces, some just names on a screen, but they are real people, real lives tied up in something bigger than any of them. He knew this was coming the moment he was caught, but seeing it laid out like this makes it feel more final, more irreversible. He clenches his jaw, staring at the photos for a long moment. Then he takes a slow breath and points to one. "Him first," he says, voice rough. Carter glances at the photo, then at Donovan, nodding slightly, writing something down, and just like that the process begins. Hours pass as Donovan talks, listing names, recalling meetings, remembering details about people he once called brothers. He does not stop, does not hesitate, because he knows hesitation is useless now. The moment he agreed to cooperate, he sealed his fate. He knows what happens to informants. He knows what happens to people who betray those they once stood beside. But he also knows what happens to people who refuse to cooperate, and he is not ready to spend the rest of his life locked in a concrete box, with no hope of release. When they finally stand, Carter closes the folder, tucking it under his arm. "We'll verify everything," he says. "If it checks out, we'll talk about your deal." He knocks on the door again, and the female agent gestures for Donovan to stand. He does, slowly, his body aching from hours of sitting, his mind foggy from the weight of what he has done. They lead him out of the interrogation room, down the narrow hallway, past rows of officers who refuse to meet his eyes. He is no longer one of them. He is nothing to them, just another traitor, just another disgrace. The cell door slams shut behind him, and he sits on the metal bench, staring at the floor. Hours pass, maybe more. The light outside his cell never changes. The air stays the same, stale and thick with regret. He leans back against the wall, closing his eyes, trying to push away the faces of the men he just named. But they will not leave him. They linger in the darkness behind his eyelids, whispering their anger, their betrayal, their disbelief. Days pass, news spreads, the trial approaches, media coverage explodes, former colleagues come forward condemning him, the department distances itself completely, officials denounce his actions, his name is everywhere, but not in the way he once dreamed, not as a hero, not as a man of the law, but as a traitor, as a failure, as a warning. The final verdict comes faster than expected: life in prison, no possibility of parole. The courtroom is packed when the sentence is read. Reporters, soldiers, former officers, and in the middle of it all, General Marcus Hayes stands tall, his expression unreadable. He does not gloat, does not smirk. He simply watches as Donovan is led away, chains around his wrists and ankles, the sound of cameras flashing the last thing he hears before the door slams behind him, sealing his fate forever.